Good morning. Good morning. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Clemson. My name is Holly with an E, and I am your worship associate today. That's my new name around here ever since we decided to call the Reverend Holly Brown, who is a Holly without an E. Here at UUFC, we welcome all who come seeking a spiritual home among us, whether it's your 100th time or your first time or anything in between. If you happen to be a first-time visitor, we would love to get to know you. If you're here in person, please be sure to visit our welcome table right outside the sanctuary and stay down the hall for conversation after the service during social time. If you're at home and viewing us online, we would be happy for you to receive our newsletter so that you can learn more about us. You can find us at uufc.org. I have a few announcements. There's announcements on the back of your bulletin, and I urge you to keep it and take it home to remind you. But there's a few other things. One is that Article 2 continues. Article 2 is the revision of the principles, and the next step is that there are 3 meetings scheduled, one this Thursday night and 2 in the following weeks, to discuss proposed amendments. They're Zoom meetings, and they're in the weekly connection. And I encourage you, if you have any opinions whatsoever about changing the principles, to attend one of those meetings, because it's really your last chance to speak before they put together the amended version to take to General Assembly. So that's real important. And we're going to be talking more about Article 2 today. A couple of other things. There's a drum streaming service from Columbia this Thursday night at 8 o'clock. I don't know what all the letters in drum stand for. The U is obviously for Unitarian Universalist, and one of the M's is for multicultural. But anyway, that gives you a sense of the flavor, and there's lots of music. And Kathy's trying to organize a group to watch it in the social hall at 8 o'clock. So if you're interested, get in touch with Kathy, and and plan to be here. I can't be here because I have another meeting right before, but it'd be well worth doing. Our charity or donation or benevolence of the month is the Clemson Child Development Center, which is very dear to the hearts of this congregation because of our very, very long association with it. On the 21st, we have an animal blessing, and you can send pictures to Reverend Christina if you don't want to bring your animal. It's particularly advisable in the case of cats who have minds of their own, and snakes and a few other kinds of animals that we might not want to have in the sanctuary, but love them anyway. And on the 4th of June, there will be an opportunity for people who want to join to become new members. So please speak to Reverend Christina if you're interested in becoming a member. Okay, I think I had something else. Let me see what it was. Let me look at the back of the order of service here. Got too many pieces of paper. Here it is. There's a movie this month. The next movie we're going to be watching is, let's see, where is it? Movie with a Message, Inside Out. Right. And Putt for Parkinson's is tomorrow. If you want to support that, speak to Elaine Faithful. And the camping trip is the week of June 9th. And there's lots of other things going on, so please read the announcements. And now I invite you to, let's see, invite you to greet your neighbors. If you want to stand up and say hello and introduce yourself. '61, enter, rejoice, and come in. The words are up here if you don't have hymnals. Our opening words today come from Reverend Monica Jacobson Tennyson. What is it that calls you here, that calls you onward, that calls you inward, that leads you homeward? What is it that gives you the power to make the change, to ask that question, to take that journey? What is it that says you have done well, that asks you to learn more, that brings you to stillness, that holds you up in hard times? It is relationship, the beating heart of our faith. It begins when we share this hour, our truths, this air, our hearts. Come, let us worship together.
Well, it is so good to be with you. I've been away for 3 Sundays in a row, 2 of which were your candidating weeks, and what a glorious thing for you to celebrate today. I'm so happy for you. I know that it has been a time of much effort and even a little anxiety, especially for the search team who's been working so hard. And I was wondering if we could give them one more round of applause. It's a bittersweet time for me. One of the things that being an interim minister means is I came pre-fired. But it also means when you call a new minister, it means I did my job right. And we worked together as a team to help you figure out what you needed, and everybody made that happen. And I'm so glad to be able to celebrate with you. I know many of you have questions about what's happening next with me, and I'm in the process, and maybe in a month from now, it'll be clear what I'm doing next, and I'll let you know when I know. I was wondering if Cody could come up now and help me light the chalice. We join over 1,000 other congregations doing the same thing this morning. And this is the symbol of our faith and the symbol of our community. And thank you for helping us light this chalice today. That flame is so tall, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Here, you can do that one too. Thank you. If you would share with me the words of affirmation that are in your order of service. We gather together in a spirit of love, with justice as our guide. This is our chosen covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth with freedom, and to care for one another. And Ben, I'm going to use one of these microphones up here. Does it matter which one?
No, we don't need to turn it on.
Okay, so I have a couple of things to show the young and young at heart. So I do invite you to come forward because I have props. So Maya and Talia, would you come up here? Oh, and you too, come on up. Oh, so many. Great. So, let me grab my book. So my story today is about not being afraid of change. Now, you might not be so much afraid of change in the way that many of us in the room are about technology, because many of us in this room, including myself, have seen changes in technology over the last few decades. Who in here has a collection of albums? Yeah. Who in here has some of these on their shelf? Some albums, records. Who in here recognizes this, an 8-track tape. This, did you hear that? She said, what now? This is actually one of the original tapes that we used to listen to music on. And when I was a kid, our big van out front had an 8-track player, and I would go out there and listen to the Bee Gees. So after these tapes, which made a funny noise in the middle of the songs, we moved to cassette tapes. I actually made this mixtape for the person I was dating in 1994, and it says number 5 on it. So clearly it was a thing. And then we moved to CDs. You have a bunch of CDs? Half a shelf of CDs. Okay. Now, we've got all those things that we used to have on shelves. Guess what we listen to music on now?
The radio?
The radio in the car or our phones. So music has always been there. We have always wanted to listen to music, but the way we listen to music changed. Yeah? That's cool. Let's talk about that later. Yeah. Yeah. So I'm going to repeat what you said a little shorter because the people at home wouldn't be able to hear you. So if I heard you right, you were saying you could even go to a concert and listen to the piano or the guitar, and there would be more music, or the orchestra. So technology has changed. Hold on, I've got more to tell. Technology has changed, but the core of what we were talking about, the core of wanting to listen to music was always there. Now, I'm going to show you one more prop. Let's think about movies. Have you ever seen this action in the game charades? No. And it means movies. No. You know why? I'm going to tell you why. Because there used to be big movie recorders, projectors, and you would have to turn the film, and that's why this is a movie sign. And then there would be these big reels of tape. A bit like in Curious George. And then they made VHS tapes that you could use at home. Can you believe I have all this stuff? And then they had DVDs that look a little bit like CDs, look like this. I'll show you later. I'll show you later. And now what do we watch movies on? Netflix, right? Or on your phone, or what else? Or Disney, yeah. So the technology has changed, but the core is still the same. We want to watch movies. We want to listen to music. And we could even go into endless changes about computers. Yeah. And yes, you have a question? Yeah, you could watch music videos. So technology changes all the time. Who remembers computers the size of a room? A room. Computers used to fill a whole room, and now it's on this in my pocket. So things changed. So why am I telling you all of this? Who? So have you heard of the 7 principles of Unitarian Universalism? Yeah, you've heard of that? Okay. Have you heard that, did you know that there used to only be 6? And there's even an idea to add an 8th? Yeah, so things have changed. And today, after you go to your group, we are going to talk about how the words about the principles are being proposed to change. But what's the core to them is who we are, how we are together, and what we believe together in our shared values. So things can change, but we don't have to be afraid of it. And before we're done, I'm going to let you ask your question. Oh, can you, I'll tell it during Choice of Concerns, okay? Okay, all right. So I thank you for letting me tell you about change and letting me show you all my old props. And it shows you why my garage is full. All right. So would you help us collect the food now? Thank you. The snowman. I want to share with you that, again, that our benevolence this month is the Clemson Child Development Center. And we offer 25% of all of the donations that are in our offerings each week. And for those of you who might be at home or want to donate later, you can do so on the website. There's a donate button on our homepage, and you can see all of the organizations that we have relationships with. Thank you so much for your generosity. We've got quite a few joys and concerns today, and I'm going to start out with a joy. Somebody has something to celebrate. Our friend Bill Brule said that his book, Coupling, about a successful marriage, was awarded 5 stars by a professional reviewer. Oh, and Ellen Few is having knee surgery next Tuesday. And Ellen, even though it's going to be hard, what you're sharing is that you are glad to finally get it done. Yes. Elaine Faithful has a sorrow to share, though. Elaine lived in Kentucky and saw horses die during that time, and it was always so heartbreaking. And my sorrow is for the 7 horses that died this week at Churchill Downs. What a tragedy. A joy. Daryl Yardley made it back from Okefenokee. Did I say it right? Okefenokee. Alligators, skeeters, and swamps, and Harleys. Wow, Carol Ward celebrates that she delivered 104.5 pounds of food to the Clemson Community Care from our collections. Fantastic. Oh, and somebody lost a tooth. Aurelia, did you lose a tooth? Yay! I also want to add that our dear Elizabeth, where are you, Elizabeth? I saw you, I thought, is getting treatment this summer for continued treatment for seeking recovery and health, and we celebrate that for you, that you're getting closer to that.
There's also another one that I think I lost, and it's Bill Brueggel's.
Oh,
And he's celebrating that his book on successful marriage
yes. We said it. We shared it.
awarded something.
Yes. Yes.
5 stars.
Yay.
Okay.
And I do want to also acknowledge that your son-in-law, Kosh, was in the hospital and is doing better at home, and we wish him continued health in his recovery. I want to acknowledge visitors today. I know that there are some who have come for the very first time, and we welcome you, and we put a stone in for you. Would you like to introduce yourself?
My name is Mike Smith, and I live in Pendleton. Good to meet you all.
Nice to meet you.
Can we also celebrate that we have reclaimed our city for the summer?
Oh, Holly with an E wants to acknowledge that the students have mostly gone and you have reclaimed your city for the summer. And the last stone we put in are for those things that have been shared deeply in our hearts but are not ready to be public. Sometimes those are sorrows, and sometimes those are even joys. Know that we are here for you when you are ready. This community welcomes you. And now we will let the children go to their groups. Thank you for all the religious education leaders who are doing that today. Well, I sang in a choir concert last night, which was fun and exciting, and I'm losing my voice a little bit because I had to really sing. I sing in the Atlanta Resistance Revival Choir, and we sing protest songs and civil rights oldies and new ones, and it was a packed house. And if I lose my voice in the midst of all of this, I'll just whisper, all right? One of the things I wanted to share with you today is about this tattoo. Can you see the tree? Some of you may have heard the story about this tattoo. It is an image that was inspired by Gustav Klimt's Tree of Life painting. 29 years ago, I was dating a wonderful person, and I was quite smitten. He gave me a card of Klimt's Tree of Life painting, and I was moved by the image. And soon after, he moved away to take a job in Korea. And we were apart for a year and a half, and it was really a long, hard time. I was lonely. I missed him, and he did come back. There was a talisman, though. That image of a tree really represented strength and persistence for both of us. And so when we did finally decide to get married, we decided to put the image of that tree on the front of our wedding invitation. And we acknowledged that image as something that was very meaningful for us in our wedding ceremony. Our UU wedding was unique indeed. We not only wrote our own vows, we created the whole service with a set of rituals followed by a covenant. Not the usual setting, not the usual patterns of a wedding. And this caused much distress to the minister at the time, Reverend Bob Shibley, who wasn't used to giving over the reins to a ministerial student. But he obliged, and I appreciated that. And those rituals that we created in our service created and established commitments that we were to make each year that would ground us in our relationship. Things like sharing a glass of wine, exchanging flowers, staying in touch physically, sharing stories and kind words, and sharing wedding vows and wearing rings. And when we found years later that our relationship was not as strong as we wanted it to be, we revisited our covenant. This set of words that formed our covenant didn't give us the exact recipe of who was to do the dishes and how we were to divide the laundry. There was no prescription or specific answers of how to deal with raising children together, or how to deal with the illnesses that came and surprised us in our family and caused a lot of heartbreak. We both wanted to continue our education. There was no sense of order of who was to do what when and how we could figure out how to afford it. So, those words of our covenant were not exact for all of our life, yet they were a guide. They were a guide for getting us back to our center, back to our core, back to our shared values, and we needed this reminder. So soon after this time, and a really good marriage counselor, because counseling sometimes is really what we need when we go through hard times, we decided to renew our covenant and remarry each other. And the symbol of the tree was again the symbol of strength and persistence. So in honor of our new phase of marriage, we both got this tattoo on our wrists. It is a constant reminder of a covenantal relationship with each other, and for this, I am grateful. Today, we are exploring the words that describe our UU values. The words themselves are a holder, They are a holder of that covenant that we make with each other. Most of us would point to our principles in the way that they are currently written to describe Unitarian Universalism. And if you do a Google search, which I did last night, the first thing that comes up is our 7 principles. And they do share our values and all of the things that we consider so important. But did you know that the principles are a part of something called Article 2, which in one sense, if you think about a non-creedal religion of something that's shared, you would not think, oh, it's a particular article of our bylaws. Doesn't sound very exciting, does it? But Article 2 holds the principles or the values we share and we covenant to, our sources, the things we aspire to, and the way we are together. They begin with this phrase: we, the member congregations of the Unitarian Universalist Association, covenant to affirm and promote. It is the basis of our covenant. The very first articulation of what we would call our principles now was actually written in 1961. And for those of you who might not know why we have this really weird long name, kind of like my hyphenated last name, we're the Unitarian Universalist, because the Unitarians and the Universalist ended up sharing pulpits in small towns and in cities all across the country. The women's groups were meeting together. The youth groups were meeting together. The ministers were swapping pulpits, and eventually they realized, you know, financially, it would be really beneficial if we would just join and merge and be stronger together. Well, can you imagine what the process was in the beginning to join 2 different denominations into one? To come up with the first set of principles, of which there were only 6 of them, was passed after 57 amendments. And delegates had to coordinate with each other all those different amendments, and it took years. And finally, the delegates felt that they had found the words, the holder of that covenant of their newly shared faith. Well, in Article 2, in the bylaws, was the reminder, just like we had in our marriage, to come back to those principles, to come back to the covenant which bonds you together, and to check in and say, do these fit anymore? Do they express where we are now in comparison to where we used to be? In 1985, the principles were visited again, and this time, the purpose was to expand the language, to take away the male-centered language and to make it about all people. And there was the addition of a 7th principle. The 7th principle, of course, is one that acknowledges our relationship with the earth and not just our relationship with each other. So at this time, many of you have heard of the 8th principle, am I correct? So the 8th principle is also another proposal to expand our principles to include the work of dismantling racism in the culture in which we live. Our faith, our Unitarian Universalist faith, is a living faith. Our gray hymnal that's in the chairs next to you is titled Singing the Living Tradition. This means that we don't draw our faith from only one thing that happened long ago. We draw from the wisdom and the revelation of people spoken in the now and in the past. We draw from those people who gave us poetry and scripture and sacred music, but we also draw on our experiences and all the things coming out on the Webb telescope, for example, the things that connect us to the universe. that is unfolding in front of us. The late, great James Luther Adams, a Unitarian minister from years ago, put it this way: a living tradition is not bequeathed through some law of inheritance. It must be earned, not without dust and heat, and not without humbling grace. Now, saying that is one thing, but putting that into practice is another. No matter how revolutionary our origins, institutions by nature settle into systems that perpetuate the way things have always been. And this is why the UUA bylaws charge the member congregations to revisit Article 2 every 15 years. And this is why our principles, the words that express our shared values, don't become so unmovable and unchangeable. Remember the statement, "Nothing is carved in stone"? Well, I think about our UU principles, and that at this time it feels so common to say, well, we have the 7 principles now, we can never change them. It's like the 10 Commandments. However, there is the proposal to change the language to fit more common and modern language now. And it's shaken things up a bit. And people are really getting upset about the process in some ways. What is at heart and in the core of what our shared values are is to find the words to describe them in a way that allow for our covenant to be alive. Much like in my marriage, we needed to relive our covenant. So I invite you now, as we talk a little bit about what the words may be, to look at them with curiosity, as opposed to a sense of, oh, we can never change them. And just like all that technology, to remember the core of our experience is to be in connection with each other. The commission that is looking at our Article 2 now, formed in 2020, they shared lots of surveys, emails, things on web pages, to host lots of panels, and throughout the years of 2020, 2021, and 2022, people were engaged in trying to understand if we were to change something, what would we change it to and why? Over the course of the work, the commission engaged in 45 feedback sessions with a total of 4,611 participants. And then the videos and the surveys were responded to by almost 11,000 people. So it's not everybody. And Holly, did you participate in one of those? No? See? Even Holly, who believes so strongly in democracy, didn't participate. So what I ask of you now is to take a minute and just look at the words. And I ask you to look at those words. They're in your newsletter, for example. And I want to ask you to respond with how they make you feel. And what do they make you think of? And everybody's switching their papers as if they're on the back. They're not on the back because they're too long. It's in the weekly connection. And there are some actually, those are the old ones, Carol.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, those are the ones that we established in 1985. So I was wondering, Ben, if we could put up the slide. And I'm going to show you these words. Each one of these 7 words has a paragraph that describes the intention behind these words. And you probably can't see it over here. I'll move back. And one thing that Carl will notice is that love is at the center. Carl and I have had many discussions about the inexactness of the word love for Carl. But what is key about the word love is that it is an imperative of something to do, something to reach out to for in your life, to be in relationship with others and with the earth and with your intention of how to be. And I would also like for you to bring up the word cloud slide. You'll see love is the biggest word. If you enter the gray hymnal into a program that makes a word cloud, all the words of our hymns, love is the most common word. And yet, love is not in our principles currently. Isn't that interesting? So one of the surveys brought out that if love is a shared value so much that we consider it core to who we are, then our principles and our purposes and our sources and our inspirations need to recognize that. You'll also see sing and day and live and earth and spirit and heart and light. Lots of words, but love is what is core. What does it mean to be grounded in love? One part of the proposed wording is that love is the power that holds us together and is the center of our shared values. That we are accountable to one another for doing the work of living our shared values through the spiritual discipline of love. The writer Adrienne Marie Brown, who is a Black writer, a womanist, a strong voice of justice in our current world, writes that if the goal is to increase love rather than winning or dominating a constant opponent, I think we could actually imagine liberation from constant oppression. We would suddenly be seeing everything we do, everyone we meet, not through the tactical eyes of war and power, but through the eyes of love. Close quote. So to include love in our shared values seems really important to me, and I appreciate the reworking of the UU principles to point us towards ways of being more loving together. In June 18th, you as a congregation will be having a congregational meeting. It happens to be Father's Day also, so there might be ways in which we can include voting. If you're not here, I'm not sure how we're going to do the voting of that day. But I want to bring your attention to that vote, that it's not about Article 2 in this wording. It's about the 8th principle. So I want to clarify, how does the 8th principle relate to these changes to the principles? How are they related? If love is at the core of the reworking of the wording of the Article 2 proposal, just know that that will be years-long, a 2 years long process, which Holly will talk about in a minute. And the intention behind the wording of the 8th principle, which I'll talk about more in just a minute, is to incorporate the ideas of the 8th principle into that wording. But just like any vote, the Article 2 proposal might not go through. We might not have 7 new words. It might stay the same, as Carol pointed out in the hymnal. We've had votes in the past that didn't go through. So I want to ask you to shift for a moment and help me focus on the 8th principle. I want to explain that the 8th principle itself is about dismantling racism in ourselves, in our congregations, and in our world. And certainly, your congregation, who has been a supporter of CAPER, which is Clemson Area Pledge to End Racism, has made a palpable commitment to ending racism in the place in which you live and in your relationships with each other. Almost 20 years ago, some of the Black leaders in Unitarian Universalism said that if we were to fully live out the 7 principles, we would not need an 8th principle to remind us to dismantle racism. But there was enough of a gap in the voices and leaders who were coming from people who had identified themselves as people of color, saying that racism is still very present, not just in the communities and in the country in which we live, which we all know is so true, but also in our relationships with each other within our congregations. So being a Unitarian Universalist that opens our work towards working toward that as an 8th principle is in and of itself perhaps to be incorporated into the Article 2 language, but in and of itself is an important task. The very first congregation that voted and put forth the 8th principle was in 2013, I think. And in 2013, since then, there are 224 congregations who have subsequently also become a supporter of the 8th principle. So the board is asking you to vote in June to become the 225th. And I implore you to consider it and to make a commitment to each other and to yourself and to this city and to this state and to this world that so desperately needs that care. We can change this faith by reminding ourselves of who we are and what is at the center. And what I ask is that if you could let that faith change you also. May it change us in the process. May it remind us of our covenant here together. And may we make it so. Amen. Thank you.
Last week, when Reverend Holly asked us, what is your favorite principle? I was the one that shouted, democracy. I love them all, but democracy is a large part of my mission in life to understand, practice, and encourage good, inclusive processes in making collective decisions. The UUA is trying to do that with the principles. So as a good citizen of our faith tradition, I encourage you to be engaged. You can start by reading the old and new versions, as Reverend Christina has asked, of Article 2 that was posted on the Weekly Connection this week. Or we handed out about 40 copies over the previous weeks. Being open and inclusive and making sure that every voice is heard is a practice that we Unitarian Universalists share with the Quakers, the United Church of Christ, and the League of Women Voters, although apparently not with the state legislatures of Tennessee and Missouri. The downside of our approach is that we may never get to a conclusion. That's especially true at UUA General Assembly. I've been many times. And it's a big room full of 3,000 or 4,000 people, each of whom wants to make their voice heard. Wordsmithing does not work well as a crowdsourcing activity. So here is what the process is, a question several of you asked me at our 3 meetings where we discussed the proposed changes in Article 2. As Christina said, the UU bylaws require a review of the principles every 15 years to emphasize the living part of living tradition. They are to be submitted to 2 successive General Assemblies. The first requires a simple majority. The second requires a 3/4 vote to adopt, and they cannot be amended from the floor. Now, in 1994, we did have an amendment that added the 6th source, and there was a proposed revision in 2009 that failed by a narrow margin. I think the main cause of defeat was that they took the 6 sources, which some of us are rather attached to, and reduced them to the 3 paragraphs. And that's something that's also an issue this year, I think. The UUA set out information early in the year and set an April 30th deadline for submitting amendments. 9 people in this congregation attended 3 gatherings, and we submitted 2 proposed amendments that are also in the weekly connection. The next opportunity for input is to attend one of 3 UUA-sponsored Zoom discussion meetings that will consider amendments to be incorporated before the General Assembly in June. And then finally, Christina, Louis Breger, and Elaine Faithful will be voting delegates, so you can let them know which amendments you support or propose. The 9 people who participated in our gatherings had a lot of positive things to say. They liked having values instead of principles. The word worship, I've had this conversation with many individuals in the conversation who think worship means God. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. It doesn't have to be a transitive verb. It can even be a noun. But the Old English word is actually worthship, and it means to hold up what we value. Shared values are the foundation of our faith tradition. These 9 people also agreed that perhaps changing green to teal on the logo was not such a great idea, as we all understand the color wheel of primary and secondary colors. We want green back. We like the repeated use of "we covenant to," followed by how we're going to promote that value. We like that much of the language of the current principles was incorporated, as well as new language from the proposed 8th principle. Some people ask why we need to revisit the principles at all. They're part of our tradition. As Reverend Christina said, aren't they timeless? Yes and no. I think of the new version as a little like a picture that you put in a new frame, and you see it differently. The process reminds me of something we did as a congregation, I think about 6 or 7 years ago. It started when somebody objected to the use of the word church, because it used to start with, "Love is the spirit of this church." That was a rather standard version of the affirmation. Then people started saying, "Yeah, and while we're at it, I don't like the word law. That doesn't sound very Unitarian Universalist," because the second line was, "and service is its law." The last line said to help one another, which some of us thought sounded like a Girl Scout promise or a Boy Scout promise. So we invited people to suggest words or phrases on sheets posted on the wall in the social room. Then the worship team got together and did a first draft and invited people to say after a worship service to finalize a revised covenant. The product was just enough of a mix of the old familiar language and some changes to more or less satisfy everyone. And yes, I did hear from everybody who was less satisfied. So that's what we as a faith tradition are trying to do. We want you to be part of the process. So do make your voice heard, especially at one of these 3 UUA Zoom meetings, which are in the weekly connection, and to Christina and Elaine and Louis as they prepare to cast their votes on our behalf in June. And having done that, you can give yourself a pat on the back for doing your religious civic duty. And now it's time for our closing hymn, number 34, "Though I May Speak with Bravest Fire."
If I remember correctly, your name was Michael, right? So Michael, this was a lot more of a lecture than a fun, rousing sermon. So I hope you give us another chance to be a little bit more exciting last time. When I was told to preach on Article 2, I thought, oh no. I gave it my all. I promise I gave it my all. So I'm going to extinguish this chalice knowing that I am connected to you through my covenant to you, and that is a bond of love. So I will put out the chalice with, I love you.